On our anniversary, my wife revealed she was pregnant with my brother's child. I always believed that love could overcome anything. We had faced difficult times before, but through every challenge, I trusted Sarah, thinking our bond was unbreakable. We weren't rich, but we managed. I worked long hours as a mechanic, and Sarah had a decent job at a law firm as a secretary. We lived modestly in our small, cozy home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was ours. But over the past year, something changed in Sarah. I noticed it in the way she looked at me, the sharpness in her tone when we talked about money, and the constant pressure she placed on me to provide more, to be more. Her growing obsession with wealth became impossible to ignore. She began dropping hints about the expensive vacations her colleagues took, the luxury cars they drove, and the beautiful homes they owned. I tried to brush it off at first, reassuring her that we were doing fine, but deep down, I knew she wasn't satisfied. The final blow came on a night that was supposed to be special. I had worked late, picking up extra hours to save for our anniversary. When I got home, I found Sarah already dressed up, looking more glamorous than I had seen in years. She wore a sleek black dress, her makeup perfect, and a sparkling necklace I didn't recognize. "Wow, you look amazing," I said, feeling a pang of guilt that I hadn't been able to buy her anything fancy. She barely looked at me. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cold and distant. The words sent a chill down my spine. I had heard that phrase too many times before, and it was never good. I sat down, already bracing myself for whatever was coming. "I can't do this anymore," she said, crossing her arms. "I'm tired of scraping by. We've been married for years, and what do we have to show for it? A rundown house, bills piling up, and no future. I want more, Jason. I deserve more." My heart sank. "Sarah, I'm doing everything I can. I'm trying to save." "No," she interrupted sharply. "It's not enough. I've already made up my mind. There's someone else." The room spun. "What?" She didn't flinch. "His name's Mark. He's one of the partners at the firm. He's wealthy, successful, and he's offering me the life I've always dreamed of. He loves me, Jason. He wants to give me everything you can't." I stared at her, the air knocked out of my lungs. "Sarah, this is insane. You can't just throw away our marriage for money. What about everything we've been through? What about us?" "There is no us anymore," she said, her voice flat. "You don't understand. You've been content with this small life, but I'm not. I want more than what you can give me. Mark can give me that." I stood up, anger boiling inside me. "So, that's it? You're leaving me for a guy with a bigger paycheck?" She shrugged, her expression cold and unfeeling. "It's not just about money, Jason. It's about the life I want. A life you can't provide." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was standing in front of me, tearing our life apart as if it meant nothing. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, and it wasn't just the affair, it was the realization that Sarah valued money more than our love. She walked past me, heading for the door. "I'll be staying with Mark tonight. I'll come by to get the rest of my things later." I stood there, watching her leave, my world crumbling around me. How could she do this? How could someone I had shared my life with, someone I trusted completely, walk away so easily? As the door slammed behind her, I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. The house felt emptier than ever, and I was left to wonder how things had gone so wrong. The days after Sarah left were a blur. I walked through the motions of life in a daze, work, eat, sleep, repeating the cycle, but nothing felt real anymore. Every corner of the house reminded me of her, the smell of her perfume lingering in the bedroom, the photo of us from our honeymoon still on the mantel. It was like living in a ghost town of memories, haunted by the woman who had chosen someone else over me. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. "I want more. I deserve more." As if everything we had built together, our home, our marriage, meant nothing in the face of someone else's wealth. It wasn't just that she cheated, it was that she had done it for something as hollow as money. I kept thinking, what was wrong with our life? Sure, we weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. I worked hard, made sacrifices, and thought we were content. But clearly, I had missed something huge. Work became my escape. I buried myself in the shop, fixing cars for hours on end, trying to drown out the gnawing pain in my chest. But no matter how busy I stayed, the anger and betrayal simmered just beneath the surface, ready to boil over at any moment. The worst part was that Mark, the man she had left me for, wasn't just some random guy. He was powerful, well known in the community, someone people respected. I hated him without even knowing him. How could he look at a married woman, someone who had already built a life with someone else, and think he had the right to steal that away? And how could Sarah let him? I didn't want to know the details, but in a small town, it was impossible not to hear the gossip. Friends and neighbors who had once looked at Sarah and me as a happy couple now whispered behind my back. At the grocery store, at the gas station, everywhere I went, I could feel their eyes on me, pitying me, judging me. And the more they talked, the more I realized just how deep Sarah's betrayal went. One evening, I got a call from Jake, my best friend since high school. He had heard about what happened and insisted on coming over. At first, I resisted. I wasn't in the mood for company, especially not to rehash the nightmare that had become my life. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. Jake showed up with a six-pack of beer and a concerned look on his face. "Man, I can't believe she did this," he said, sitting down heavily on the couch. "You guys seemed solid." "Yeah, well, I guess money talks," I muttered bitterly, taking a long swig from my beer. "She didn't even care about what we had. She threw it all away for a bigger paycheck." Jake sighed, shaking his head. "I never liked that guy, Mark. I always had a bad feeling about him." I glanced at him, surprised. "You knew him?" "Not personally, but I've seen him around. Flashy cars, expensive suits, always showing off. Guys like that think they can have anything they want, and I guess he thought he could have Sarah too." The anger I had been holding in for days flared up. "And she let him. She didn't even hesitate. She just left." Jake was quiet for a moment, then looked at me seriously. "You know, man, this isn't your fault. Sarah made her choice. It wasn't because you didn't give her enough. It was because she's too shallow to appreciate what she had." His words hit me hard, but I couldn't shake the guilt that had been building inside me since the night she left. What if I wasn't enough, though? What if I could have done more? Jake leaned forward, his voice firm. "Don't do that to yourself. Don't make this about you not being good enough. She's the one who betrayed you. She's the one who chose money over love." I nodded, but deep down, the doubts remained. Could I have worked harder? Made more money? Would that have kept her from leaving? As Jake and I sat there in silence, the reality of my situation started to sink in even deeper. Sarah was gone, and I was left with a broken heart and a shattered sense of who I was. But Jake was right about one thing: this wasn't my fault. I had given everything I could to our marriage. Sarah was the one who had decided it wasn't enough. The night wore on, and as Jake finally left, I sat on the porch, staring out into the darkness. The anger had faded, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I wasn't sure what came next or how I was supposed to pick up the pieces of my life after this. But one thing was clear: I couldn't keep living in the past, haunted by what Sarah had done. She had chosen her path, and now I had to find mine. Days turned into weeks, and I was still trying to come to terms with Sarah's betrayal. Every time I thought I was starting to heal, something would drag me back down: the memories, the whispers from people in town, the unbearable loneliness. I avoided places we used to go together, skipped events where I knew she and Mark might show up, and buried myself deeper in work. But nothing really helped. I told myself that I was over her, that I didn't care anymore, but the truth was I couldn't stop thinking about what she had done to me. Every night, I wondered if it was all a mistake, if she'd realized she had made the wrong choice and come back. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How could I even consider wanting her back after everything she'd done? One evening, I got home from work later than usual, exhausted and covered in grease. As I unlocked the front door, I noticed something strange. A car I didn't recognize was parked a few houses down, but I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't until I stepped inside and heard movement from the living room that my heart stopped. Standing in the middle of my house, as if she still belonged there, was Sarah. "What the hell are you doing here?" I snapped, too shocked to think of anything else to say. She turned around, startled, her eyes wide. She looked different. Not the same woman who had walked out of my life weeks ago. She looked tired, nervous. She was no longer wearing the glamorous clothes I had last seen her in, no longer glowing with the confidence that came from being with someone like Mark. "Jason, I needed to talk to you," she stammered, fidgeting with her hands. I felt a rush of anger surge through me. How dare she show up here, unannounced, as if she had the right? As if everything was still normal between us? "You've got a lot of nerve coming here after what you did," I said coldly, stepping farther into the room. "You left me, Sarah. You made your choice. What more is there to say?" She bit her lip, her eyes downcast. I know I hurt you, but No. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything. You walked out of our marriage like it was nothing. You left me for someone with more money, like I was just some stepping stone to your better life." My voice was rising, the fury I had been holding back for weeks finally spilling out. "So why are you here now? Mark didn't give you the dream you wanted?" She winced at my words, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel the pain I had been carrying since the night she left. I wanted her to know that she wasn't going to waltz back into my life and expect forgiveness. "I made a mistake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I laughed bitterly. "A mistake? Sarah, you didn't trip and fall into someone else's bed. You made a choice. You made a conscious decision to leave me for a guy with a bigger bank account. So don't stand here and tell me this was just a mistake." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I refused to feel sympathy for her. Not after everything. "I thought Mark could give me the life I wanted," she said, her voice cracking. "But it's not what I expected. He's not who I thought he was." I stared at her, my anger giving way to disbelief. "You're telling me that you left me, threw away our entire marriage, for someone who turned out to be a disappointment?" She nodded, wiping away her tears. "He's not the man I thought he was, Jason. He doesn't care about me. All he cares about is his money, his reputation. I'm just another possession to him." I shook my head, laughing again. "You don't get it, do you? That's what you wanted, Sarah. You wanted the money. You wanted the life that came with it. And now you're surprised that it's empty?" She took a step closer to me, her eyes pleading. "I made a mistake. I should have never left you. I see that now. I miss us, Jason. I miss you." I backed away, shaking my head. "You don't miss me. You miss the security. You miss the comfort of knowing that I loved you, that I would have done anything for you. But you threw that away, Sarah. You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it." She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "It's too late. I can't just forget what you did. I can't trust you anymore. You showed me who you really are, and I'm not going to make the mistake of letting you back into my life." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time since she had walked into the room, I saw the reality hit her. She wasn't going to get what she wanted. Not this time. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice broken. I looked at her one last time, feeling the weight of everything that had happened between us. "Sorry isn't enough, Sarah. It never will be." Without another word, she turned and left, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing in the empty house. I stood there, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was over. The chapter with Sarah was finally closed. But as I sat down on the couch, staring at the place where she had stood just moments ago, I realized that even though she was gone, the scars of her betrayal would stay with me for a long time. After Sarah left for good, the silence in the house felt heavier than before. It was as if her brief return had torn open wounds that were just starting to heal. But this time, there was no confusion about what I needed to do. It was time to rebuild my life, even if I had no idea where to start. I threw myself into work, taking on more shifts at the shop and even picking up odd jobs here and there. The long hours kept me from dwelling too much on the past, and the extra cash didn't hurt either. But no matter how busy I stayed, the loneliness was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, especially when I came home to an empty house. Friends tried to help. Jake stopped by regularly, bringing food, beer, and his company, though neither of us talked much about Sarah. He knew I didn't want to go over it again. Talking wouldn't change anything anyway. Sarah was gone, and nothing I said or did would bring back what we had. But one evening, Jake did something unexpected. He showed up with a flyer in his hand and a wide grin on his face. "What's this?" I asked, eyeing the paper skeptically. "It's a charity event," he said, holding it up for me to see. "They're hosting a community fundraiser at the rec center next weekend. Local businesses are sponsoring it, and there'll be food, games, raffles, stuff like that. It'll be fun." I raised an eyebrow. "You know I'm not really in the mood for that kind of thing." Jake sighed and plopped down on the couch. "Man, you've been hiding out in this house for weeks. I get it, what happened with Sarah sucked, but you've got to start living your life again. Come on, it's for a good cause. You'll be around people, and who knows? You might actually enjoy yourself." I shook my head, unconvinced. "I don't know. Just think about it," he said, leaving the flyer on the coffee table before heading out the door. "I'll pick you up if you decide to go." After he left, I glanced at the flyer, part of me tempted to throw it away. I wasn't ready to face the world again, wasn't ready to pretend that everything was okay. But Jake had a point, I couldn't hide forever. And maybe, just maybe, going out and doing something different would help me feel normal again, even if only for a few hours. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was still on the fence, but Jake showed up at my door, as promised, and before I knew it, I was in his truck, heading toward the rec center. The event was already in full swing by the time we arrived. The parking lot was packed with cars, and a steady stream of families, couples, and groups of friends filed into the building. It was a typical small-town affair, everyone knew everyone, and the atmosphere was warm and lively, with kids running around and the smell of barbecued food wafting through the air. We wandered around for a bit, grabbing some food and drinks, and I tried to relax. I wasn't used to being in crowds anymore, and the constant buzz of laughter and chatter felt overwhelming at first. But after a while, I started to feel a little more at ease. Jake introduced me to a few people I didn't know, and before long, we found ourselves hanging out with a group by the raffle booth, joking and laughing like old times. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Sarah. I wasn't replaying her betrayal in my mind or wondering what I could have done differently. I was just there, in the moment, surrounded by people who didn't know my story, who didn't care about the mess I had been through. It was freeing in a way I hadn't expected. And that's when I saw her. She was standing across the room, talking to someone near one of the game booths. I didn't recognize her at first, but something about her caught my eye. Maybe it was the way she laughed, her head thrown back, or the genuine smile on her face that seemed so rare in a world full of fake expressions. Jake noticed me staring and followed my gaze. "You should go talk to her," he said, nudging me with his elbow. I looked at him, startled. "What? No. I'm not, no way." He grinned. "Why not? It's just a conversation. You don't have to marry her. But maybe it's time you start meeting people again." I shook my head, but Jake was persistent. "Come on, man. What's the worst that could happen?" I hesitated, the idea of talking to someone new feeling both terrifying and strangely appealing at the same time. After everything with Sarah, I hadn't even considered the possibility of meeting someone else. It seemed too soon, too complicated, and yet, before I could talk myself out of it, I found myself walking across the room toward her. My heart pounded in my chest, and I had no idea what I was going to say, but there was something about her that made me want to take the chance. As I got closer, she turned and met my eyes, her smile softening as if she somehow understood that this wasn't easy for me. "Hi," I said, feeling awkward and out of place. "I'm Jason." She smiled warmly, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you, Jason. I'm Emily." And just like that, in the middle of a crowded room full of noise and chaos, I felt a small spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The rest of that night at the community event felt like a blur. I didn't expect anything major to come from meeting Emily, but the conversation with her was easy. It wasn't weighed down by my past, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again, not the broken man Sarah had left behind, but someone with a future that might not be so bleak. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I continued to run into each other around town. At first, it was purely by chance, at the grocery store, the coffee shop, or just passing each other on the street. Each time, we exchanged a few words, nothing serious, but there was an undeniable connection. She was different from anyone I'd met before. She didn't pry or ask about my past. It was as if she sensed that I wasn't ready to talk about it, and instead, she just enjoyed the present. One Saturday afternoon, after yet another coincidental meeting at the local farmers market, Emily suggested we grab coffee. I agreed, and what was supposed to be a quick cup turned into hours of conversation. We talked about everything: our favorite movies, music, books. She shared stories about her travels, and I found myself laughing in a way I hadn't in a long time. It was easy to be around her. As the weeks passed, we started seeing more of each other. It wasn't anything official, and I wasn't even sure what to call it, but it felt good. Emily never pushed for more than I was ready to give, and I appreciated that. There were still days when the past weighed heavily on me, when I caught myself thinking about Sarah and everything I'd lost, but those days were fewer and farther between. One evening, Emily invited me over for dinner at her place. It was the first time I'd been to her house, and I felt a little nervous, but when I arrived, she greeted me with a smile that put me at ease. The smell of something delicious cooking in the oven filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile as I stepped inside. "You didn't have to go all out," I said, taking in the candles on the table and the carefully prepared meal. She shrugged playfully. "I wanted to." We sat down, and as the night went on, the conversation flowed as naturally as ever. But there was something different about the way Emily looked at me that night. Something deeper, as if she had been waiting for the right moment to say what was on her mind. Halfway through dinner, she set down her fork and took a deep breath. "Jason, can I ask you something?" I felt my chest tighten, suddenly nervous. "Sure." "Why did you leave the military?" she asked, her voice gentle but direct. I hadn't expected that question, but I realized it was something I had never really told her about. My time in the military had been a huge part of my life, but I had walked away from it shortly after Sarah left me. The two events were so closely tied together in my mind that talking about one always brought up memories of the other. But with Emily, I felt like I could be honest. I left because I needed to. After everything that happened with Sarah, I couldn't focus anymore. I wasn't in the right headspace to keep serving, and I didn't want to put anyone at risk. It just felt like the right time to move on, I said, my voice quieter than I'd intended. Emily nodded, her expression understanding. "That makes sense. I just wanted to know more about that part of your life. I don't want to push you, but I care about you, Jason. And I want to understand what you've been through. For the first time since we'd met, I felt a lump in my throat. No one had really asked me about my feelings since Sarah had left. I had buried them so deep that I had almost forgotten how to express them. But sitting there, looking at Emily, I realized that she was someone I could open up to. Sarah's betrayal, it broke me in a way I didn't even realize at first, I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. I gave her everything, and she threw it away for someone else. I thought I could just power through it, but it's taken me longer to heal than I expected. Emily reached across the table, placing her hand gently over mine. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But I'm glad you're here now. And I want you to know that you don't have to go through this alone. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had carried the weight of my pain on my own, convinced that no one else could understand it. But sitting there, with Emily's hand in mine, I realized that maybe I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. We finished dinner, but the conversation stayed with me long after I left her house that night. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally starting to let go of the past. Emily wasn't just a distraction or a temporary escape, she was someone who truly cared about me, flaws and all. Over the next few months, our relationship deepened. I found myself looking forward to seeing her, to sharing my life with her in a way I hadn't with anyone since Sarah. The pain of the past was still there, but it didn't control me anymore. With Emily, I felt like I had a future again. One evening, as we sat on her porch, watching the sunset, Emily turned to me with a serious expression. I need to ask you something, she said, her voice soft but steady. Okay, I replied, curious. Do you think you're ready to move on? Really move on, she asked, her eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, considering her question. I had spent so long stuck in the past, trapped by the memories of Sarah's betrayal, that I hadn't even realized how much I had already moved forward. But with Emily by my side, I knew the answer. I think I am, I said, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. With you, I think I'm ready for whatever comes next. Emily smiled, and in that moment, I knew that my life was finally starting to turn around. The scars from my past would always be there, but they didn't define me anymore. With Emily, I had found something I never thought I'd have again: hope, trust, and the possibility of happiness. The road to healing was long, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking it alone. Months had passed since I first met Emily, and life had taken on a rhythm I hadn't thought possible after Sarah. It wasn't just that I was moving forward, I was growing, changing in ways I couldn't have foreseen. Emily was a big part of that, but it was also the decision I made within myself. To stop dwelling on what was lost and start appreciating what was left. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a stack of photos, Sarah and I from when we were younger, before everything had fallen apart. I stared at the images for a long time, tracing the outlines of the smiles we once shared. They felt like echoes from another lifetime, distant and faint, but they didn't hurt as much as they used to. I picked up one photo, a picture of us on our wedding day. We looked so happy, so hopeful about the future we thought we'd build together. A future that never came to pass. But now, looking at that photo, I didn't feel the same pang of regret or betrayal that had haunted me for so long. Instead, I felt peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from forgetting or pretending it never happened. It was the peace that came from acceptance, of the pain, the mistakes, the betrayal. Of the fact that Sarah and I had shared something real, even if it hadn't lasted. I took a deep breath, setting the photo aside. I knew I was ready to move on. Truly ready this time. That night, Emily and I had dinner at my place. It was a quiet evening, just the two of us, and as we sat together on the couch after the meal, I turned to her with something I had been thinking about for a while. I have something I need to tell you, I began, my voice steady but laced with emotion. Emily raised an eyebrow, sensing the seriousness in my tone. What's on your mind? I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. I found some old photos of Sarah and me today. It brought back a lot of memories. She didn't say anything, just nodded, waiting for me to continue. I realized that for a long time, I was still holding on to the past, to the pain and the hurt. But today, I finally let it go. I'm ready to close that chapter of my life for good. And I wanted you to know that. Emily's eyes softened, and she reached out to take my hand. Jason, I'm proud of you. I know how hard this has been for you, but you've come so far. And I'm here for whatever comes next. I squeezed her hand, feeling a weight lift from my chest. I'm not sure what the future holds, but with you, I feel like I can face it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear outside the window. The future still held uncertainty, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't haunted by what had been, or what could have been. I was ready to embrace what was yet to come. As we sat together, the past fading into the background, I realized that I had finally found the peace I had been searching for. Not just with Sarah, but with myself. And in that peace, I found the courage to hope again, for love, for happiness, for a life beyond the betrayal and the pain. A life that was mine to build, one step at a time.